about the stories of our children getting opportunity to go to college and about mamas and daddies putting nickels and dimes and quarters together to pay tuition. It's about our stories. It's about the hardships and the pain and the suffering. It's about the protests and the marching. It's about the standing. It's about the legislation. It's about all of that. It's our story.
Witness to Grace, a testimony of favor, is a poignant, true life story that chronicles the remarkable journey of W. Franklyn Richardson, from humble and challenging beginnings to honored positions of power and global influence. Witness to Grace gives an intimate portrayal of the rise of one of the most respected religious and civil rights leaders of our time.
Hey family, welcome to The Journey with Pastor Mike. This is a special edition of The Journey. We are so grateful today. I am more than grateful to have with us today someone who I value and treasure tremendously in my life. My friend, my mentor, the Reverend Dr. W. Franklyn Richardson, who is the senior pastor of Grace Baptist Church in Mount Vernon, New York. I cannot begin to tell you how much Dr. Richardson's life has impacted me. His advice, his willingness to just share and pour in to me has been immeasurable. And Doc, I'm gonna tell you something. The very first time I met you, and you have no idea, was 26 years ago when I was 23 years old. I was in seminary in my first year, or entering my second year at the time. And I was working for a pastor who was working on your campaign, National Baptist Convention. And there was a meeting at the hotel in New Orleans, and he asked me to come to the meeting with him. So I'm in a meeting with you and your team. I'm sitting in the background, just listening. Never met you in my life, but I was here in this meeting. I thought it was an amazing privilege because here's this young seminarian preacher, and I'm sitting here in this meeting for someone who's running for president of the Baptist Convention. And you didn't know who I was from the fly on the wall, but it was just amazing at that time, just be part of that. And I remember on your way out the door, you spoke to me, I shook your hand, and that was that. I had no idea that all those years later that you would play such a pivotal role in my life and become someone who I count as friends. So thank you. And not just myself, but the impact you've had on my wife and I, our family, is amazing. But I wanted today to talk with you. I could talk about what you mean to me forever. That's real. But I wanted today to talk about your new book, Witness to Grace, a testimony of favor, that I'm excited about. And not just me, but so many people are excited about. Rev, what was the impetus to this book? What provoked you to write the book now?
Well, you know, I've had a long journey of exposure and opportunity. And so about 3 years ago, I had a surgery, as you know, and I was, it was a very serious surgery, even though, thank God, I came through wonderfully and everything came out all right. But it was very threatening to me. It put me in touch with my vulnerability that I had never had before, a real sense of vulnerability. And so I began to think, I said, you know, this has been such an important journey for me. I need to write this down. And so I began to reflect. Vulnerability makes you reflect more completely. You know, and so I started reflecting. I said, you know, I need to write this down. And as I reflected on it, the thing that stood out most as I went back over my journey and how my life had unfolded was the whole idea of God's grace. It's like Paul's thing, I am what I am, but by the grace of God. I got real in touch with the sense that my life had been an act of grace. And that, in fact, you can only see, you see with faith going forward.
Yeah.
But you can only see grace looking back over your shoulder.
Yeah.
And see how God was functioning in your life. And so as I began to reflect on where I had been and how I'd gotten there and what he kept me from and what he delivered me to, that became the pronounced point. And so I named the effort from the very beginning, Witness to Grace. And I chose to write the book through the prism of grace. I used grace as the lens by which I reflected on my journey. Mm-hmm. And it ultimately became a testimony of favor, because when I look back and see what God had done for me, I felt a sense of his favor.
Yeah. You know, there's something you just said that resonates with me as a pastor. I've learned a lot from you. You've been pastoring over 40 years now. But let me ask this, because I think it's essential to the pastoral work. Why is it so difficult, especially for younger preachers in particular? Why is it so difficult for so many to see their vulnerability as an asset in this work?
I think it's because we're so achievement driven.
Yeah.
And we really don't have, if we're not careful, we won't have much time to reflect.
Yeah.
We're trying to get to the next appointment, the next opportunity, the next this, the next that. We're always driven by this sense of achievement. Yeah. and don't understand that we need time to reflect.
Yeah.
And so what happens is you lose any sense of vulnerability when you're so focused on getting to the next appointment, coming to the next assignment, preaching the next sermon.
Yeah.
And so it robs you of a sense of being in touch with what's really happening.
Yeah.
I think that's what pandemic did. That's what pandemic's done for all of us.
Yeah.
It raised our vulnerability. Everybody. It raised the vulnerability for every person. Yeah.
I once heard a spiritual leader say there's a hidden danger in feeling that or seeking the purpose, your purpose in life. And he said that the issue is once you discover it, once you achieve it, you almost never become satisfied. So it's this constant repurposing, trying to figure out what's the next thing, as opposed to
this ain't enough.
Yeah. As opposed to saying, okay, let me pause in this and reflect on the journey. Like you said, we're so achievement driven, we don't reflect on the journey up until this point, right? So if you thought about within the book, what would you say are maybe three key themes in the book that you think resonate with all the readers?
Well, I think the first one would be the sense that I began with very meager potential. Mm-hmm. And the Lord allowed to take that meager, take disappointment and all that, and turn it into opportunity. In other words, what would appear to be, as we say today, what would appear to be a setback was really a setup.
Yeah.
For God to do what God is going to do. So the first theme is that there's a sense in which all of us ought not allow our situation to determine our destination.
Yeah.
That we ought to be open to God doing what God's going to do and understand that God's not restricted by your circumstance.
Yes.
Your circumstances does not dictate your destination.
Yeah.
And I think that that's an important lesson for everybody, for young people today, for those of us who are older, for those who are in the mid-stages of their lives. Do not become obsessed with your location and situation, that it obscures what God may have as your destination. Be open to God. Be open to God.
Yeah.
Second thing I think was how God had permitted, one. I think that first thing is a real heavy theme. The other one is to understand that life, the topography of life, grace is not about mountains. Mm-hmm. Grace is about valleys. It's not the peaks, but the pits. And in the pits, we find deeper meaning, deeper relationship with God. Exercise the value of the valleys.
Yeah.
Because the truth is, Doc, valleys and mountains are delusions. You can't have a valley without a mountain. They're co-conspirators.
Yeah.
They coexist.
Yeah.
You need a mountain. You can't have no, it's just topography impossible. If you're gonna have a mountain, you got to have a valley.
Yeah.
And so, and don't go to pieces when you get to the valley. Understand that the valley is not long-lived. Soon you'll be on the mountain, or the terrain will change, and you're either always on your way from a valley or on your way into a valley. Because that's the nature of life. And don't go to pieces. That would be one of the themes. Don't be shattered by your valley experiences. Use them as opportunities to grow. Use them as opportunity to fill your purpose.
Man, let me tell you.
I guess the final thing.
No, go ahead. Keep going.
I think the final thing that I would call a theme in the book is how God how the nearness of God, when you can know his presence, can give you a sense of calm and peace.
Yeah.
Which is the whole Emmanuel notion.
Yeah.
The reason why Emmanuel is a soothing name is because Emmanuel means that no matter what I'm going through, God is with me.
Yeah.
God is there. And I guess that's the other theme that I think is in this book, that God is always available and accessible. And we have to reach out for him. And so, and in between those themes are the stories that undergird the themes that I just outlined. It's the stories of my journey.
Yeah.
Early stories of I talk about the grace of the pre-existent grace of God. In other words, my dad was born in South Carolina. We came through the port of Charleston. He had to leave South Carolina, Columbia, at 15 years old because he misspoke to a white person. And they took him under the cover of night. And at 15 years old, and he ended up in Baltimore, Maryland with nothing, broke, nothing. Young man, no job, 15, and got messed up with a guy who was a shady character. My father's father also had left South Carolina, but he had never seen his father. My father had never seen his father. But somebody saw my father in Baltimore and called his father, whom he'd never seen, and said, "Your son is here with a shady character. If he keeps on out here, he won't live." My father's father said, my grandfather said, "Send the boy to me in Philadelphia." And I said to my granddaughter, I was sitting there talking, I said, you know, if Papa had been lynched by the Ku Klux Klan or killed in Baltimore, I would never be here.
Yeah.
And she said, "And me either, Papa." And she said, "Me either, Papa."
Yeah. That's the part we forget, Rev, that we're all here because somebody with our DNA survived.
Yes.
Survived.
And I call that pre-existent grace.
Lord.
You know, it's the grace that the grace was functioning before I even got here on my behalf. And so I talk about that, and I talk about how I grew up in Philadelphia, how my mother became my first escort to faith. She led me to Christ. And subsequently from her, I've had a tremendous road of mentors, people who have mentored me, nurtured me, cultivated me. And if I had any, if there was any reason to try to explain why I was able to do what I've been able to do, it would have to be found in the fact that God allowed by his grace certain mentors to intervene at certain critical times in my life and help shepherd me to where God wanted me to go next. And that's why I put a lot of emphasis on the role of mentoring.
Yeah.
And that too often, and many pastors today, and especially younger guys, they have not seen the role of a mentoring. They think that it's all in the academy and I can get it and I don't. But one of the great resources of Black preachers and Black pulpit is that we depended on generational mentoring. help shape us and get us to where we need to be. And so the book is really about how these mentors intersected in my life.
Yeah.
Some things I had to overcome. I guess one of the things I would tell you is that I had to overcome what was viewed as limited capacity. I grew up in Philadelphia, in West Philadelphia High School. I wanted to be a doctor, but back in that day, they would promote you by what they call social promotion. If you didn't misbehave and came to class every day, you were gonna go to the next grade, whether you knew anything or not. So right. When I got to the 10th grade, I went to my counselor, Mr. Dribbin, I'll never forget his name. And I told him I wanted to be a doctor. He said, "Oh, no, you're not college material. You need to try to get some kind of vocational opportunity. You don't have that kind of." I said, "Oh, okay." So then I didn't believe him. I didn't accept it, but I went on to West Philadelphia Community College, and I flunked out of there. And it became apparent to me that maybe he knew what he was talking about. And the truth is, he really did, because I wasn't college material because the school had not prepared me to be college material. They marked me by who I was, that I wasn't college material, not by my ability or my potential. And so I graduated not being able to read, and didn't realize I had any problem reading until I went to that first semester of West Philadelphia Community College. And when I went there and found out that I flunked out, and I didn't know no reason why I flunked out. I was doing the same thing I've been doing for 12 years, but I flunked out. I ultimately dropped the doctor notes and went to my pastor. And I told him, I said, "I want to be a preacher. I want to be prepared." He said, "Well," I said, "Well, I flunked out of community college already." He said, "Well, don't worry about it." He said, I'm gonna recommend you to Virginia Union."
Who was your pastor at the time?
James Edward Hamlin in Philadelphia. Community Baptist Church. And he recommended me. Go ahead.
No, I'm about to say something, because I'm gonna come back to that in a second, Rev. But a couple of things that resonate with me, and I see why now our paths have been so intertwined. When I was a senior in high school, my guidance counselor told me he didn't think I could go to college. And same thing, I was in college material, and had convinced me to try to sign up for the military. Yes. And I literally went down to Fort Hamilton in Brooklyn. I went to Recruiter, believing I couldn't go to college. But you talk about grace. The day I took my physical, they stamped me as temporarily disqualified because of my condition. They just want a doctor's note. The day I went to go get the doctor's note, there was a massive accident on the Belt Parkway that delayed me getting to the doctor. By the time the recruiter got me the doctor's office, the office was closed. So the recruiter said, "Well, I'll pick you up tomorrow." He drops me at my mom's house, because I wasn't staying with my parents at the time. I had some major issues. But at the house that day was a letter from Morehouse College that told me I got accepted. And the only reason I got in is because I was in one of these at-risk programs, and my mentor was a Morehouse graduate and advocated. I didn't get in any college I applied to. That's why I knew the guidance counselor was right. And it was Morehouse that let me in. And if there was no accident that day, if I didn't get that letter, didn't get dropped at my mom's house that day, I would have been in the Navy. But all those things, great. That's my point. The other thing that resonates with me, Rev, is what you said. I've often told people, there are lessons I've learned in the valley that the mountain can never teach me. Right?
Yes, sir.
So those moments become galvanizing, right? And then thirdly, again, what you said, it's mentors. You talked about your pastor. Name for me some of those mentors who help kind of light that path for you.
Well, I just go, so our story is identical. I got in Virginia Union on a conditional matriculation because I couldn't read. They said, "We'll put you in remediation for a year, and if you could pass that, we'll let you stay." Well, Lord, 35 years later, I signed every degree of everybody who graduated from the university.
That's what I was about to say, boy, look at that.
So, that's God's grace.
You don't understand. You are chair of the board of trustees of the school that put you on this conditional matriculation.
That's right. That's up, right?
That's it.
What a mighty God we serve.
That's it.
So,
That's it.
but the mentors happened along the way. So there was A.B. James was the dean of the School of Religion when I went to Virginia Union, and he kind of took a liking to me. I remember walking in his office, young and feeling big, because I was a licensed preacher. I hadn't preached my initial sermon before covered, and I said, Dr. James, I'm Reverend Richardson, and I want to I want to get a deferment from the Army for I forgot what it's called at that time.
Conscientious objector?
Yeah, no, it wasn't even that strong. It was like it was an exemption based on some kind of D or something, based on being in seminary.
Oh, okay,
being in religion, and 4D or something like that. But anyway, he said, I said, yeah. He said, well, you're not even you ain't no reverend. Who told you a reverend? You ain't. Doc, he stripped me down real good, but I left out there. And he applied, and I got the 4D exemption. But he never let me go though. He stayed with me. I remember I got called to my first church at 19 years old. Pastor Rising Mount Zion, 100-year-old congregation, and I was a sophomore in college.
Lord have mercy.
And so I took all the responsibility of the church, and I was successful. And one day I was riding through the city, and he pulled up in his car next to me and my wife, and he said, Franklyn, you come with me over to my house right now, you and your wife. I said, okay. I went over there, went to the president's house, sat on his couch. He said, you're very successful. You're being very successful as pastor in this community and at Rising Mount Zion. He said, but you got to finish your degree because you're going to be apologizing the rest of your life for not having it. And my wife said, I tried to tell him. He threw me on the bus, Doc.
Oh, God.
So and that made me go back and finish. Then by that time, I got called to Grace in New York. So I didn't want to go back and forth. I went back for a year to finish undergrad. So then I went on and I taught Gardner Taylor. He came into my life. And Gardner recommended me to Yale. I never would have gotten Yale. Matter of fact, when I walked across the campus, I used to pinch myself. I couldn't believe I was at Yale Divinity School. And then there was Sandy Ray. When I got to New York, Mrs. Ray, her son, Talmadge Owens, from a previous marriage, he and I were in Philadelphia together in West Philadelphia High School.
Wow.
When she found out that, she adopted my wife and I, gave me exposure to Dr. Ray. I ended up being very close to Dr. Ray. I ended up writing his book, Journey Through the Jungle.
I remember
and that. I ended up negotiating at Broadman Press. And then when he died, I was, and I'll never forget this, Doc, we're doing the program. And Mrs. Ray said to me, Franklyn, you were close to Doc. I want you to give the minister's tribute. I said, oh, Ms. Ray, no. Dr. Ray, he was vice president of the National Baptist Convention. He was huge, Doc. He was the man. He was personal friends with Nelson Rockefeller. We had been to Rockefeller's office and so forth. And Ms. Ray said, and so I said, no, I can't do that. You need all these preachers in the country who love Dr. Ray. And she said, Franklyn, do you not know the importance of a moment?
Oh my God.
She wasn't playing with me. And so I ended up doing the 15-minute tribute. I went to Gardner before. I said, Doc.
Because he did the eulogy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I heard.
And I went to him. Yeah, and I went to him and I told him, I said, Doc, I don't feel I'm qualified to do this. Somebody else ought to do this. And he said, Franklyn, you do what she asked you to do. And so I did it, and I'll never forget when I finished it, because I was the only one who had read his book, because the book hadn't been released until after he died. I had turned he approved the galley proof, but he never saw the actual book. And so when I got up, my remarks were filled with reflections from a book nobody else had read.
Oh,
And
wow.
and Gardner Taylor, when I sat down, Gardner Taylor howled out, Franklyn, Franklyn. And when I finished that day downstairs in the sanctuary, T.J. Jemison, who was the secretary of the National Baptist Convention, was there to represent the convention, came up to me and said, Richardson, you lost your mentor today, didn't you? I said, yes, I did. He said, I'm gonna take you up. And he did. And when he became president of the National Baptist Convention, he recommended to them that I would become the secretary. Following him, after he'd been there 29 years.
Lord have mercy.
And he recommended me, and for 13 years, I had access to him all over the world, and his advice and his shaping, and he did things for my career that my father could have never done. And he was such a vital Bible and exposed. His dad had been the president of the National Baptist Convention, so he had all this history. He was a walking history book of the National Baptist Convention. And he passed all that on to me. And so he was great. And then there was Bill Harvey at the Foreign Mission Board.
Yeah.
And just on and on, people who came in my life just at the right time. Manuel Scott. Manuel Scott came to town in Richmond, Doc. I was the chairman of the Citywide Revival, and he was our guest. And so he went with me Friday night before he was supposed to preach, to hear me preach. When I finished, he told me, he said, Richardson, you don't need no manuscript. You throw that manuscript away. Don't you use no more manuscript preaching. And I said, Doc, you sure? And so from that day to this, I'm not taking a manuscript in the pulpit. Now, many times I wanted to run back and go get it. But I resisted it.
Yeah.
And but I'm just trying to say, those kind of people, Doc, Pearl Mankins, a great historian, she was a contributor shaping my intellectual development. Just great people who I owe so much to. And so part of what drove me to book was that I owed so much to so many who were ahead of me. I needed to leave my story for the benefit of those who came behind me. Lord. And so that's the kind of story of them, the mentors. I'm sure I've left out some, but I tried to capture most of them in the book.
Well, Rev, let me tell you, I'll briefly say this. 3 people who are influential to me. And also, again, as I'm hearing you, and let me tell you why I love the journey and the way we do this. You learn people's stories. Stories what bring us together, that shape us. And I'm learning a lot about you in this conversation. I think about all the conversations you and I have had, sitting at breakfast, just talking. And so many things I just never asked, right? And so, you know, the first person to hold me accountable as a preacher was Bill Jones. Was my pastor. And I remember when I I felt like I was called to ministry, but still hesitant. And I was at Morehouse, and Dr. Jones came to preach at this church, small church in Atlanta. And of course, you know, Dr. Jones preached, the church is full of preachers. And so he asked all the preachers to stand up. And he saw me in the back, and I was there with some friends from Morehouse, and I didn't stand up because I still felt inadequate. You know, I had preached already, but I was like, So everybody sat down, and he said, Michael, he said, are you a now this is in front of the whole church. He said, aren't you a preacher? I said, I'm sitting like, oh my God. He said, stand up. Now I got to stand up when nobody else is standing. And I stood up, and he said, everybody said, that's my son in the ministry. He is a preacher. And that he pushed me. And then through him, I got introduced to Dr. Taylor. And Dr. Taylor became a mentor who just, he explained to me how he came to preach without notes. And it wasn't even him, it was his first wife who took his notes away from him when he went to preach one morning.
Dr. Mike.
And took the manuscript off his desk because she knew he didn't need them. When he was going, you know, that little chapel, he would go pray and then come back into the office. He said he came back in and the notes manuscript was gone. His wife who took it. And he said, I
never heard that story.
Yes. He said he never preached with notes again. And his wife said she would hear him preach that sermon at the house before Sunday. She knew he didn't need it, but it became a crush. And it was his wife who took him away. And then lastly, when I was in seminary, and I was other mentors, but my advisor in seminary, who actually was the reason why I went to Duke, was Sam Proctor. And
Dr. Mighty.
so that was my advisor in seminary. He just happened to be teaching at Duke while I was there. I was on my way to Harvard School of Divinity. He preached at Morehouse my senior year. He asked me, was I going to school? I said, well, I'm going to Harvard, but I'm waiting to see how much money they give me. I applied to Duke. I'm waiting to hear. He says to me, go to Duke. I said, why? He said, I'll be teaching there. I said, well, if you could be my advisor, I'll go. Well, there it was. That's how I ended up at Duke.
My.
And then let me get this last one. Very brief. You mentioned T.J. Jemison. T.J. Jemison, when he was president, preached at Morehouse. And I had to do the prayer before he spoke. You know, we young, we trying to be impressive. And after the service, he pulls me to the side and he says, young man, he said, that was a powerful prayer. He said, I can feel right now you have a bright future ahead of you. And that was Dr. Jemison. That was it. You know, that was it. And this the overlapping of those kinds of experiences. What do you think if well, I'll put it to you this way. I know that, and you already alluded to this, that we miss sometimes that our legacy is not based on things. Like part of your legacy, Doc, is the countless people you've poured into, that you've mentored, who because of you, part of who they are makes sense, right? Because of your input, impact, and your pushing. I'm one of those people. And we're in a moment now where activism is necessary, right? How we understand ourselves, not just as clergy, but as activists and being prophetic in this moment. How would you say your faith has informed your long work of activism? How has your faith informed your activism?
Well, you know, I came up preaching, and the most dominant preaching personality when I was coming along, 1966, 65, I preached my trial sermon in 67. And the most prominent, dominant preaching figure was Martin Luther King Jr. When I was entering the ministry. And he affected the era of Black preaching with social accountability. And he introduced the social gospel notion. Or it got exposure. He might wasn't the first one, but he certainly gave it greater exposure. Consequently, I entered into ministry in that era when the Black church dominant personality was leading us towards changing our circumstance and social justice. And so I entered into the study of the scripture as a minister from the prism of Jesus as an advocate, Jesus as a social justice figure. So my involvement in social justice is not something I added on. It came out of my understanding Jesus as a liberator and understanding the gospel as an affirmation of the value of my humanity and the dignity that I sought for myself and for my people. So it wasn't like I added on social justice. I don't even know how today, based on what I know now, I don't know how anybody reads the Bible and don't become a social activist. Yeah. I don't see how they do it. I don't see how you can how can you ignore the social justice in the gospel? Yeah. That's why when these evangelicals, white evangelicals, I don't know the Jesus they know. Their Jesus is foreign to me, Doc. I don't know nothing about that. I don't know that Jesus is a stranger. My Jesus is a liberator. Their Jesus is an oppressor. Night and day. And so I got to so my whole life and my whole experience in the gospel has been one of understanding the link between the gospel and social justice. And so for me, there is no line. There's no demarcation between preaching and social activism. They are connected. And it's like we pray on our knees, but we stand on our feet.
Yes, sir.
And when we get up off our knees, we got to go act out the prayer we prayed.
Mm. So if you were talking, and I know you do anyway, as you talk to countless young pastors, what would you say in this cultural, political, social moment is required from the quote unquote Black church right now? What is required from us?
Well, you know, I would tell young preachers, that young Black preachers, that you have a legacy of being oppressed. You also have a legacy of the church being the voice of the oppressed, and the preacher being the one who calls us to our better selves and affirms us in spite of a culture that diminishes our value. And so I would tell them, you not only are you have the social implications of the gospel as a gospel of social justice, but you have the sociological legacy of an oppressed people who have been liberated and advanced to where we are this day because of that gospel. And if for you to do something else is to betray the legacy that you inherited.
Yeah.
So for me, a young preacher today, and I get sometimes I get a little concerned with some of our preachers who have a prosperity mentality or a slick trick to their ministry, or a total self-serving dimension to the ministry, and that's not who the church is in its best light. Sure, there have been individuals in the history that have exploited the church, but that's not who we are in the best light. In our best light, we are advocates for social justice, liberators. That's who we are.
Let me tell you, I have to be mindful because I can keep going. I'm gonna have to do this offline with you guys. Just keep going. But something we always do as we close out every segment of the journey is we ask the guests 3 things that you've learned along your journey. This includes how you dealt with obstacles, challenges, anything. 3 things that you can impart upon us as viewers that have been helpful as you have been a witness to grace. What are 3 things you've learned in your life that you think can help guide many of us on our journeys?
First is I've learned to always presume the presence of God in your life. That's important, that presumption, because that means that he is never not there. You must presume that he is present. Therefore, you are never alone, and you have a calmness that flows from his sovereignty. So presume it, and that means that nothing can stop you if you presume his presence, because nothing's more powerful than God is. So the presumption of God has been a tremendous asset to me. I've never been anywhere that I wondered whether God was there. I presume. And as a consequence, it has helped me in every trial, every challenge, to presume his presence. I've always had help available. I say in the book that I've lost some, I won a lot, but I've never been defeated. And the reason why I've never been defeated is because of the presumption of God in my life.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
The second thing I would tell people is in your life, do not underestimate the importance of preparation. Do not play down being prepared. And sometimes you can't make the connection between preparation and your future. Young people, it's real hard sometimes to be committed to preparation because they have a hard time considering its value. But opportunity is where, achievement is where proper opportunity and preparation intersect. That's where it is.
I love that.
If you arrive at the place of opportunity and you are not prepared, there'll be no achievement. But if you prepare yourself, you can't predict the opportunity. You don't know where it's going to come from. But if you prepare yourself when that preparation meets opportunity, you will achieve. So I wish what I'm telling them, I wish I could have heard it earlier in my life. I think I've been a better student than I was. If I could have understood the value of being prepared, so that when the opportunities come, you can take advantage of them. Now I've been able to take care of some opportunities, but I think if I had heard that stronger, somebody had poured that down on me, I think I might have been a little bit, and maybe I wouldn't have. But the point is, I want to share that with them, that preparation is essential. You cannot know what your future is going to hold or what opportunity is going to come, but you can prepare for. It's better to be prepared for more than you're going to need than to be underprepared for what you achieve. I heard Jesse Jackson say in a speech one day. He said he was when he was in high school, he had a French teacher, and the French teacher, he didn't pay no attention to French. He said, back in the 50s and 60s, where he was, well, I paid attention to French. I ain't gonna never use no French. And so he said he never learned it, but he got through the course, made it pass. He said, but then later on in his life, he went to Africa. And when he got off the plane, and all the brothers was down there, and they said, "Parlez-vous français?" And he said it all hit him. How he had rejected the opportunity he had to learn French. And now he's in a foreign country where they speak French. And he couldn't speak to them because he had had the opportunity to be prepared, but he dismissed it. And that's one of the great things we have to avoid, is missing the privilege to be prepared for whatever opportunity is going to come, which will get you achievement.
Yeah.
And then I think thirdly, the presumption of God, the focus on preparation, and the power of prayer. God, being able to talk to God in our most difficult situations, in our peak pits, and to remind ourselves to pray even when we're on the peaks, because the danger of the peak, the danger of being on a mountain. If you're on a hill, if you mess up, you just stumble and get back on up and keep on going. And as a matter of fact, won't nobody know you even fell off the hill. But when you're on a mountain, Doc, when you stumble, the whole world know you stumbled. And so you need to pray as much on the peak as you do in the valley.
Yeah.
And so I found the importance of prayer, not just my words to God, but God's voice to me.
Yeah.
Listening to God. And it can be very therapeutic. It's a real way of checking your motivations, checking your values. Prayer can be a tool for checking yourself, talking to God honestly and listening back to God. So if I had to pick three things to pass on, those would be the things: the presumption of God, the need for preparation, exhausting preparations opportunity, and the power of prayer.
God, I don't know how better to end this. And I hope everyone who's watching this really takes those are three jewels: the presumption of God's presence, the importance of preparation, and the necessity of prayer, sacred conversation. I hope many of you all who are watching can understand why Dr. Richardson is so important to me and so many people. You are truly a pearl of great price to so many of us. And we are grateful for that. And family, I want to remind you, and I wanted this interview because I wanted people to support Dr. Richardson's new book, Witness to Grace, a testimony of favor. Just this conversation alone should help you understand that this book is both inspirational and aspirational. And this is something you're going to want for your own personal library, not just to read, but to cross-reference and go back to, because this interview alone will be one you need to go back to and listen to all over again, because Doc, you have encouraged me and inspired me. And I know you will do that for many who may not know you as well as I do, but in reading this book, can understand what it means to be a true witness to grace and understand the power of God unmerited favor upon one's life. So Doc, I want to thank you for joining me and for taking this time for this interview. I'm greatly appreciative. And I'm gonna tell you the truth. This interview has just simply stirred up in me the reason why I need to talk to you even more. To make sure that I keep learning and feeding and feasting off of this, and I'm truly indebted. So Doc, thank you for taking this time.
Thank you.
And I'm grateful, man. I really am. I can't tell you enough.
Oh my, I'm proud of your achievement, your accomplishment, man. You have a calm about you and a sweetness about you that is admired by all of us. And what you've done in 1 Corinthians is just extraordinary. Continue to serve the people and continue to model ministry, because we need models like you.
I appreciate it. And family, until we meet again, this is myself, Pastor Mike, and our guest, Dr. W. Franklyn Richardson, and the journey continues. And remember, along your journey, there's always opportunities and obstacles. But as Dr. Richardson said today, that there will come a point when opportunity will meet your preparation, and then it does not yet appear what you shall be. Until we meet again, peace and blessings.
Witness the Grace, a testimony of favor, is available for purchase. Get your copy today from Amazon,